Hey everybody, welcome to Yes and Improv. I'm Jack Rita. And in this video, I want to talk a little bit broadly about styles and genres. I recently worked with a group that wanted to get better at doing genres in their short form improv. So we looked at a number of different things. The first thing that I wanted to know was what genres were they most interested in? Which ones did they think that they were good at? And what sorts of games did they want to do that involved the genre? And there's a lot in each of those categories. So one of the things that we did was we had a little discussion about understanding what entails a genre. And one of the exercises that we did was we took a genre, for instance, Shakespeare, and as a group, we came up with a list of as many conventions about that genre that we could think of. It's important for everyone in the group to understand what those conventions are and how they work. So we started off with just a list of those things, just to get a sense of how much everybody felt that they knew. And some things were very specific and some things were very general, which is fine. But it is important to discuss it to get a better sense of what that means. So somebody said twins was a convention of Shakespeare, which is certainly true. It has popped up. But what does that mean? So we talked about the idea of mistaken identity. If you have a character who's a twin, other characters will assume that they're the other twin. Does the twin know that they're being mistaken for somebody else is one thing. And if they do, are they taking advantage of that is another thing. And so that's an understanding of one specific thing. But there's a lot of different conventions in Shakespeare. And Shakespeare, very broadly, has three different flavors. There's comedies, tragedies, histories. But a history can have comedy in it, and it will have some tragedy in there. So, there's some crossover. And if you're improvising something Shakespearean, is it an improvised drama or is it comedy? And for them, they're doing short form comedy improv. So that's what we were focusing on. And really what it led us to was discussing parody. And that is really what you're going after when you're doing short form genre work. You're probably looking to parody it more so than to do a genuine pastiche or we're presenting this as if it really were, Shakespeare's lost play, and we're going to improvise this for 2 hours, and it's going to be totally serious. I'm not saying that you can't or shouldn't do that. You absolutely give that a go, but it would take a lot of homework and research and practice to get there, which absolutely go for it. But I think, generally speaking, for this video, we're probably talking about short form, we're talking about comedy, and so what we're talking about is parody. That said, I think that audiences respond really well to a proper handling of a genre. So for Shakespeare, if we're going to stay with this example, you want to try to do some things that really capture the language and the story structures or the conventions of a story arc. But the language is really where it's at. And so if you're talking about speaking in similes or using 14 words when 5 would suffice, that's a pretty good approach. Less so, I think, than just adding ETH to the end of every fourth word. That's a really lazy way to parody Shakespeare, but technically would count count as parody. So I think that what you want to do is make sure that the whole group is on the same page for what are some actual conventions of the genre and of the language of the genre, especially as well. If you look at another genre that pops up a lot in short form improv, the audience will yell out film noir. And what's interesting about that is it's a genre that they've all heard of. Probably a lot of audiences couldn't do a really good job of describing what is film noir, what counts as film noir, what are some great examples of it. They have a vague idea, and the performers often are on the same page. And so you've got this situation where maybe you could do a great example of a film noir, but because they don't have that common denominator of understanding what it is, how much do they appreciate it? So you're kind of walking a fine line. I think you definitely should do that. If you know that genre well, you should use the true conventions. But you have to throw some red meat in there sometimes and do some things that this is more on the side of parody. The most common thing that I see when I see improv troupes doing short form film noir is it's a lot of monologues and soliloquies of things like, I was sitting there in a dark night in my office, throwing back 3 slugs of whiskey when she walked in, and that's certainly there have been examples of that, but it's not like, well, that has to happen in order for it to be film noir. That's not true, but it's a parody element, and it's a convention that audiences, I think, will recognize and respond to. So I'm not advocating that you definitely do this or definitely don't do that, but I think the first step, again, is to educate yourself. So if your whole troupe is not really well-versed in what film noir is, but you want to take that as a suggestion, you want to be able to do it some justice and not feel intimidated by it, you should expose yourselves to some film noir. Google some of classics and then watch them. And I like to encourage you to watch them as a group and then discuss them. Maybe you make your list of all the conventions you can think of for film noir before you watch it, and then you watch it, revisit that list, revise that list, compare and say how many of the things from the first list actually happened in it. And maybe you need to watch more than one. Maybe you have everybody go off and watch something on their own, or you assign it like, you're going to watch this, you're going to watch that, and then we'll come back together and compare some lists. And I think that's a really effective way to have a better understanding of it. And when we do short form improv, we want to be able to say, yeah, audience, yell out any style or genre, and we're going to take a crack at it. But you're going to have clever people or people who think they're clever in the audience yelling out some obscure genre, kabuki, or, no theater, which a lot of people are like, isn't that kind of like kabuki? And clearly they're not exactly the same. But even if you were doing something that is like, well, it's this, but it's not that, how much of the audience is going to understand that? And so, again, it's a question for you to have to answer for yourselves. How important is that? If at the end of the day you're putting on a comedy show and to entertain an audience, especially a paying audience, you've got to deliver something that they're going to respond to and understand. Maybe you revel in the fact that you are utterly ignorant of what that is, and that's fine. Or maybe you say, that's a really great suggestion, very clever. We don't know anything about that. And maybe we're like, and we don't want to approach cultural appropriation and feel like, oh, we're just ridiculing that genre. That's another consideration you may want to take for things like that. So get on the same page with your troupe, make the list, get a better sense of the conventions, and then just practice it. That's your best bet. A couple of games that I like to do with styles and genres, and sometimes we just say, we're just going to do a scene in the style of Shakespeare. And that's the only genre. And we have decided to do that. We're not even soliciting that as a suggestion. It's something that we've worked on and we're good at. And so that's what our focus is going to be. And we're going to do that. And maybe you want to try that out rather than saying, challenge us with any genre and we'll see what we can do. But another one is, it's an improv game that we call Changing Styles. And you get a list of genres from the audience. And the performers are going to do a scene. It's going to be a 3-4 minute long scene, but about every 20 seconds or so, 15 to 25 seconds, some moderator or one member of the troupe is just going to yell out one of the genres from the list. And so you're changing it. So you're only getting a tiny taste of each genre. And there you want to go with something very big, very broad, clear parody. No need to be subtle here. They're only going to be in that genre for 20 seconds. Another one is genre zones, where maybe you divide the stage up into 3 or 4 zones. You mark them with chairs or with lines on the stage with tape or however you want. And you assign a genre to each zone. And whenever you are in a particular zone, you're in that genre. And then you can move around on the stage. If there's one zone that you're not very good at, you can spend the least amount of time in that zone, more time in a stronger zone, move quickly through it, and give a taste of that zone. And that way, you're still hitting it, but you're playing to your strengths. And another one is to just replay. You'll do a 1-minute scene, and you're going to get a few different genres to redo that scene. You're using the scene as your anchor point for what happens, who the characters are, but you are now redoing that scene as if it were in that genre. So now it's the Shakespearean version of that scene, or the film noir version of it, or the kung fu movie version of it, or whatever your genres are. Again, we're talking parody here, probably more than anything else. It's only 1 minute, so give those a shot. Let me know in the comments if you have any specific questions about genres or some techniques that you would like to share. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.